Welcome to Monday Morning Reaction presented by Max. I'm Mitch, and I'm here to react to NFL Week 4 with the biggest disappointments so far this NFL season. The players, the teams that have been absolute busts. These guys have been bad. These teams have been even worse. So I'm going to give you my list of 7 or 8 teams or players that I think have sucked. They need to be better. Somebody should be fired. So let's talk about it, guys. Let me know in the comments if you have a candidate, if you have a nomination for a bust this NFL season. Let's start it off with the biggest of the biggest busts. His name is, and this fan base is used to it, Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns, sitting at 1-3 after winning 11 games last season, making the playoffs with Joe Flacco literally off his couch. They cannot win a game. They won one game against Jacksonville. Does that even count? We'll talk about Jacksonville in a minute. I'm not sure that even counts. 1-3. And Deshaun Watson has been the reason why. Through the first 4 games of the season, the Browns are 1-3 with Deshaun Watson throwing for 200 yards in a game, approximately 0 times out of 4. He has 4 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. He leads the NFL with 19 sacks. He has been sacked 19 times. And for those of you that just want to blame it on the offensive line, I'm pretty sure if you compare the best quarterbacks in football, the top of the list, you would probably see names like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. I wonder why. Good quarterbacks don't get sacked that much. 4.9 yards per attempt, 61% completion percentage, and he does add to the ground with 117 yards and a touchdown. But some of those numbers for what they're paying him, for the contract they gave him, for the expectations of what Deshaun Watson should be for this franchise, he was the guy that was supposed to take this great roster, a great defense, a great running game, all these pieces, Kevin Stefanski and Jim Schwartz on offense and defense coaching this football team, and elevate everybody on the roster, elevate everything. And he has deflated everything to the point where we're asking, can we get Jameis Winston, please? Because I'd rather watch that. 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions would be much more entertaining than what we're watching out of Deshaun Watson, one of the worst quarterbacks in football right now. Amari Cooper might actually go get traded. He's a candidate, potentially, if this team continues to fall and slip. So Deshaun Watson, the Cleveland Browns is a football team, overall extremely disappointing, and I don't think you can point the finger at the coaches. Stefanski, 2-time coach of the year. This comes down to quarterback play. They should have stuck with Baker Mayfield. It really feels like. The next candidate for one of the biggest busts of 2024, it's both the Jacksonville Jags and Trevor Lawrence, both in combination, because this one, unlike Deshaun Watson, I think has blame on both sides. I think Trevor Lawrence clearly has not lived up to the contract that he just received. I received backlash for saying that contract wasn't good. I think here on BR, it's okay. It's okay, Jacksonville fans, Duval, it's okay. But can we realize that Trevor Lawrence is not generational? Can we realize that yet? He has not won a game in what, like 9 starts in a row, 8 starts in a row? I've lost count at this point. He's 0-4 this season, and he has 4 games under 57% completion. 57! That's bad. Like, 4 touchdowns in 4 games, and overall 53% completion, 182 yards per game. 182, a 78.9 passer rating. Like, none of this is good from Trevor Lawrence. And yeah, the O-line is not very good. The O-line is definitely below average. There's no doubt about it. Probably bottom 5 or 6 in the league. They've faced a couple tough defenses in tough environments. They did face the Cleveland defense. They did face Miami in week 1. They did face Buffalo, right? This was probably the easiest he had against the Texans. And then you also have blame to be had on the offensive coordinator, the offensive scheme overall, the lack of addressing and fixing the offensive line that has been an issue for the last couple of years now. Doug Peterson. But here's the thing, like when you're this first overall pick, this generational talent, that's what you're expected to be. You can have a couple of years where you're learning and you're growing and you're getting better. But this is what, year 4 for Trevor Lawrence now? And he's still struggling. He is inconsistent with accuracy, inconsistent with decision-making, inconsistent with just overall completing passes right now. Like everything is bad and things have regressed in his game. We saw the peak of his play a couple years ago and he's never been the same since then. Plus, Jacksonville as a team is just awful. 29th in points per drive offensively, 30th in points per drive defensively, and 31st in passing yards allowed. So not only is the offense bad, led by a bad quarterback, but the defense is also terrible. Putrid. So the overall Jacksonville Jags organization is bad. Everything is bad. And it almost feels like it needs another restart. E. King says Ayuk is easily the biggest disappointment this year. Maybe in terms of like, for some people, fantasy and in terms of matching the contract. But I don't know, just because Jawan Jennings has been so good for them, Jordan Mason has been so good for them, that it was hard to just put Brandon Ayuk by himself on this list. I do think he'll get better as the season goes on, and I think we've seen a similar thing before. You even compare it to Josh Jacobs last year. Josh Jacobs held out, got paid. He was slow. He was out of shape. It took him a while to get his feet going and to start looking like Josh Jacobs. I think the same thing's happening to Brandon Ayuk. Baker wouldn't do well behind the Browns O-line, to be honest. I don't know if you can really compare Baker to Deshaun Watson, bro. Like, you can defend Deshaun Watson all you want, but I'm sure you would rather have Baker. The Browns offensive line has been elite for the past like 5 or 6 years. Joe Flacco was fine behind the offensive line with the injuries that they had. Sure, they changed their offensive line coach and Callahan left. But is that really the difference? All these guys just all of a sudden become terrible? Or is Deshaun Watson just holding on the ball too long and running into pressure too much? Maybe there's one similarity there and there's a bunch of differences. Not trying to light you up, but I'm just saying, man. Mark Andrews, big disappointment, says Doc. Definitely in terms of fantasy. The team, a little bit disappointing at 2-2, but they just had a huge win against the Bills. Mark Andrews feels like he's in that later stage of his career right now. Like, he feels like he is not the go-to guy anymore. And really, their passing game the last couple of weeks has done next to nothing. They have really not had to do anything passing the football. We'll see if he gets some more play near the end of the year. And we'll see. Maybe in the playoffs, Mark Andrews shows up big. But for now, he doesn't appear to be the guy. I think Zay Flowers is probably their number 1 receiver. Isaiah Likely seems to be splitting touches with him. Yeah, it sucks. I mean, if you didn't let him go in fantasy, I'd already look to be trying to trade him for anything at this point because it's been a disaster in fantasy. The next player that has been a major disappointment in 2024, you saw this one coming. None other than the man, the myth, the greatest bust in NFL history, Bryce Young. Yes, that's right. Move over to the side, Jamarcus Russell. You no longer will be named, at least from my lips, the greatest bust of all time, because Bryce Young has the worst stats ever. Worse than Jamarcus Russell. His 30.1 PFF grade this year is 33rd in the NFL, I think. And it's 20 points lower than 32. That's how bad Bryce Young is. He is 20 points on the grading scale below every other starting quarterback because he's simply not a starting quarterback. 84 yards in one game. Pathetic. 161 yards. in the other game. 0 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. He did have a rushing touchdown. I'll give him credit for that. He was sacked 6 times in 2 games. He had a 32.8 passer rating and a 57.2 passer rating. You could combine those passer ratings and it still wouldn't be a good passer rating, right? It'd be like 89. That's not even a good passer rating. You could combine the passer ratings. And then what's even worse, not only do you compare his stats to Jamarcus Russell, touchdown to interception worst, yards worse, completion percentage worse, all that stuff, right? Worse than Jamarcus Russell. But you compare him to Andy Dalton, who's an old man quarterback nobody wants as their starter. Last year, he was better than Bryce Young. This year, he's better than Bryce Young. Yeah, Carolina still sucks. There's no doubt about that. They did win a game against the Raiders last week. They did lose to the Bengals this week. But you look at Dalton's numbers, and it's not even particularly close. 5 touchdowns, 1 interception, 539 yards. That's like double what Bryce Young had in 2 games. Andy Dalton put up in 2 games, right? Dalton has only been sacked. Here's for the Browns fans out there. Andy Dalton, with the same offensive line. In fact, it's actually worse. Damian Lewis is now injured. Their highly paid guard at left guard is injured. Andy Dalton has taken 2 sacks in 2 games. Bryce Young has taken 6 in 2 games. So I don't know if there's a big discrepancy. Maybe it's just the quarterback. 101 passer rating for Andy Dalton. So obviously the coaching was fine. The O-line was fine. Deontay Johnson still can play. There's talent there. They can run the ball with Hubbard. Maybe it was just the quarterback sucks. Right? All these Panthers fans telling me that the guy was going to turn it around. CJ Stroud should have been the pick all along, guys. Should have been the pick. Bryce Young, the problem is, man, before we move on, too small. And when he's too small, he doesn't have the physical trait to overcome it. He doesn't have the quickness or the speed of Lamar Jackson, right? He doesn't have elite trait. Elite arm strength, elite accuracy, elite, like really anything. So just a complete all-around bust. Ramakowski says the Rams, sure they have injuries, but losing to the Bears is embarrassing. I honestly wouldn't say the Rams have been disappointing because of the injuries. I have to say that. Like, I think if they weren't injured, and you guys are lucky, to be honest, that you beat the Niners, because you probably shouldn't have beat the Niners in that game. But yeah, losing to the Bears is a little bit embarrassing, but they have a good defense. We'll talk about the Bears here literally in a second. But the Rams, I don't know, just the injuries. Like Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua, offensive line, like was injured from week 1. That's tough to overcome. We already knew your defense wasn't going to be great. You were relying on an elite offense, and right now it's not functioning at an elite rate because of the injuries. So that's what's happening to the Rams. It's more circumstantial, I think, than really like evidence of the team being bad. It's just injuries. Okay. Speaking of the Bears, Caleb Williams. That's right. I'm not afraid to talk about Caleb Williams being an absolute bust through 4 weeks of his NFL career. And the reason I'm not afraid is because of all this talk from Caleb Williams, that he was going to come into the NFL. He was going to set records. People don't remember this. Like Caleb Williams, before he entered the NFL, like on Hard Knocks, he's talking like, oh, it's easy. He doesn't get nervous. He's going to go out there. He's going to throw for 300 yards a game. See what CJ Stroud did. That's easy. That's just the low bar. And you think about people's expectations for Caleb this year. It's not only because of how talented he was in college and how awesome he was at USC, but then you watch him play in the preseason for glimpses and it looked good. And then you think about who he has at receiver. Like DJ Moore had a massive season with Justin Fields last year. And even I think Bajent was the other guy. You talk about Keenan Allen. You talk about Rome Odunze, top 10 wide receiver pick. DeAndre Swift was brought in, although not the greatest player, probably a little overrated. He was brought in, receiving running back. Cole Kmet, very actually underrated tight end. Yeah, the offensive line, a little bit leaky. We know this. But those receivers, that defense, this team should be a juggernaut. Generational quarterback, right? Well, Caleb, the Bears are 2-2. And imagine if they actually had generational quarterback play, because their defense right now is actually really good. They're first in terms of time of possession allowed. They're first in terms of plays allowed. They're third in terms of yards per drive allowed. And they're fourth in terms of points. So, like, the defense is good. You look at Caleb, 48.1 PFF grade, second last in the NFL, only above Bryce Young. Offense, 30th in yards as a collective, 31st in points per drive, second worst offense in the NFL. They literally won a game without scoring a touchdown or really even getting close against Tennessee in week 1. They're 26th in passing yards. Like, Caleb has been disappointing, and he's only had one game where he had 300 yards, and that was in a loss and a trailing script the entire time. The other games, all 3 were under 175 yards. He has 3 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, a 72 passer rating, a 5.6 yards per attempt, and a league leading, and this is the biggest thing, a league leading 124 yards lost on sacks. He runs backwards in circles. He runs backwards, and he tries to make a crazy play that's not there. And then when he's throwing the ball down the field, he has been terrible throwing the ball down the field. He can't hit anybody past like 10 yards right now. His deep ball has been atrocious. Anybody notice that? Like, he can't. DJ Moore looks visually frustrated after like every pass. So Caleb has been massively disappointing. But there are other players who have been owning the field. That's right. It's now time for players who owned the field, presented by Max. Stream the HBO original limited series, The Penguin, Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern on Max. Let's begin with the 3 players who own the field, starting off with, once again, the king, Derrick Henry. He's once again on the list. I'm pretty sure he was on the list last week. Derrick Henry, 29 attempts, 199 yards, 3 catches, and 8.3 yards per carry. The biggest game of the week, the Buffalo Bills, the team that looks the best in football through 3 weeks, goes to Baltimore. And Derrick Henry says, hold up. And the first play of the game from the Ravens offense is a touchdown. Vintage Derrick Henry, home run. And then later on, another home run. He was vintage Derrick Henry. And this is exactly what the Ravens were looking for when they signed Derrick Henry. A guy that could wear down a defense. A guy that would intimidate a defense. How often was Collinsworth talking about, look at this safety who's responsible? Because sometimes, you have safeties responsible in certain coverages to come down and play the run and not always back up and play like safety deep, right? And you've got guys like Cole Bishop coming down and trying to fit the run almost immediately because they're so scared that Derrick Henry's going to get the ball. They got to get in that run fit so that he doesn't hit a 60-yard run. And if he gets close to him with a head of steam, he's going to run him over. He's going to stiff arm him to the ground, right? So Derrick Henry is an absolute beast, and he owned the field against the Bills. They couldn't tackle him. They couldn't stop him, and that allowed the Ravens to dictate the pace, and Lamar, the MVP, just to sit back and chill really all day. Next up, we've got a combination of Houston Texans that I gladly have on my fantasy team. Nico Collins, the leading receiver in the NFL. He leads the NFL in receiving yards with a 12-catch, 151-yard, 1 touchdown performance on 15 targets. Who was throwing him the football? The guy that the Panthers should have picked with the first overall pick, C.J. Stroud, 67.5. I didn't give him enough credit. % completion, 345 yards, 2 touchdowns, and a 110.9 rating. Stroud was outstanding in this game. Collins, incredible in this game. The third down magic, and it feels like this connection right now is probably the best in football in terms of every time the Texans need a play, Collins. 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 Seal the game against the Colts. Collins. Need a touchdown against Jacksonville. Collins. Need to get the game going. Get some energy in the building. Sunday Night Football against the Bears defense. We talked about how good that is. Nico Collins. Touchdown. Like, every time the Texans need a spark, except for against the Vikings, because, nobody had a spark in that game for the Texans. But Stroud, outstanding, outside the pocket, maneuvering, manipulating, accuracy, ball placement, all of it, perfection. Nico Collins, just a beast after the catch, making plays down the field and, scoring a touchdown in this game as well. And a highly effective reception percentage to have 12 catches on 15 targets. That's very, very efficient. And currently leading the league in receiving yards. I don't know if he will lose this. Like, honestly, I think he could lead this the whole year. And then lastly, Baker Mayfield is our third player that owned the field. Baker Mayfield owns the Eagles. The Bucks own the Eagles. 30 for 47, 347 yards, 2 touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. That's 3 total touchdowns, over 347 yards. Baker, he came out against the Eagles and just soft zone coverages of the Eagles. He was picking them apart. Mike Evans here, Chris Godwin there, Josh Palmer there. Like, little screens to Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Like, they weren't stopped for like 4 or 5 series. I think it was 24-0 at one point. And then, they eased to the victory. You also have to talk about the 2 OG Bucks. Mike Evans, 8 catches, 94 yards, and a touchdown. Shout out to him. Levante David, 2 sacks, and a forced fumble in the game to set the tone for the defense. The Bucks, 3-1. Huge statement win, and it's led by Baker Mayfield. Those were the players that own the field this weekend, presented by Max. Stream the HBO original series, The Penguin, Thursdays at 9 p.m. Eastern. Let's get back to our busts lists with Anthony Richardson. A massive bust for like pretty much everybody this year, because not only is he a bust for the Colts and real NFL, but the way that he was absolutely steamed for fantasy football, Anthony Richardson is a massive fantasy bust as well. 3 games before he played the Steelers, he had some of the worst numbers from a passing standpoint that I have ever seen. Like 29th in PFF grade, a league low 49.3. Not even 50% completion. 49.3. 3 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. 1 touchdown every 2 interceptions. 4 big-time throws to 7 turnover-worthy plays. A 55.9 passer rating. Richardson can't make an easy throw. And that's the biggest problem. I don't really think it's that he lacks the intelligence for the position. I don't think it's that he's not physically gifted enough, obviously. I think it's just that he can't throw the ball consistently. Like, he can't legitimately throw an accurate pass. He doesn't know where the ball is going to go on a consistent basis. And when you do not have confidence in where you're placing that football, you're in trouble, because it's going to spray everywhere. And your coordinator and your offensive play caller can't trust you to be consistent. Can't trust you. So great athlete, great runner, great scrambler. But we see that when he does that more, it just gets him hit and injured, which is what ended up happening against the Steelers. Of course, the Steelers, because they hit hard. But yeah, like, just terrible passing the football and totally disappointing, even in terms of like fantasy points. Like, he was not putting up fantasy points even on the ground to the degree that people expected. Kyler Murray is a bust this year from Lupe to a certain degree. He had an amazing game against the Rams, but I didn't expect much from the Cardinals as a team, so I chose to keep them off the list. That being said, I think in the other games, especially the last 2 weeks, he has very much been disappointing against like one of the worst defenses in the league, the Commanders. I don't think that's outlandish to say that. And then the Detroit Lions defense that I think, susceptible in the secondary. At home in both games, he should play much better than he has. So I do sort of agree with you, but I thought that week 1 wasn't bad against Buffalo in Buffalo, and then week 2, he played amazing. So it's kind of hard to say there. And as a 1-3 team, that's not exactly far off from what I expected. King says the Eagles considered a bust. I almost mentioned Jalen Hurts on this list. I just had to limit the list to a certain amount of names. I wouldn't say the Eagles. I'd just say Jalen Hurts. The Eagles, I mean, maybe you could say Nick Sirianni too, because he's a terrible coach. But Jalen Hurts is really, I think, the reason that the team is not taking off to the degree that they should. I feel like he's somewhat limited. I don't think people realize how limited he is as a player. Like, he's not very good at throwing the ball outside the pocket. He doesn't see the field very well. And it feels like teams kind of know how to play him now. He's not as athletic or fast, or I would say he's still powerful, but not as fast as he used to be. And I think that's hindered his upside. It feels like you watch the Bucs play him and they just know exactly how to play him. Like, you confuse the picture in the middle of the field, don't allow him to throw in the middle of the field, and then you kind of like blitz him especially from his strong side. You force him to run to the left and make a throw that way, and he kind of funnels himself out of the pocket, and he always throws the ball away. He has very little arm flexibility, very little ability to make ad-lib throws, and that really hinders him. And then the turnovers. He leads the NFL in turnovers since the beginning of last year, I think. So that's not good for a team that has a great offensive line, Saquon to rely on now, great receivers. Like, that showed up against Tampa. Without his receivers, he didn't look as good. A lot of quarterbacks won't look as good, right? But I think the Eagles have an outstanding roster. I think they have a bad coach in Nick Sirianni, and I would say right now, below average quarterback. And I think that's what's holding them back. I think the rest of their team is fine. Their defense isn't amazing, but it's not bad. It's had its moments. The offense is incredible. It's just that I don't think those two pieces, the most important pieces, have been that great. Caleb isn't a pocket passer. Chicago needs to have better option plays with that O-line. I mean, Caleb isn't exactly the fastest guy. I mean, you're not talking about Cam Newton or Lamar Jackson here in terms of rushing ability, or even Josh Allen. I wouldn't include Caleb in that conversation. He's quick, he's agile, but he is a scrambler, right? Like, that's his strength, is scrambling, finding plays that are not there. But he needs to learn how to play on schedule. He needs to learn how to play from within the pocket better. And like I said, I think his accuracy, especially downfield, needs to be much better as a player. I would also agree, though, to your point of the coaching staff. Shane Waldron is just not a great offensive coordinator, and I wasn't very high on him in Seattle, and I think that showed up in Chicago. You know, you look at the difference between Cliff Kingsbury being hired in Washington right now. Cliff's always great at the beginning of years, so take it with a grain of salt, but that has had a huge impact on how effective Jaden Daniels has been. And you look at Shane Waldron in Chicago and the difference there, and the confidence and just the easy throws and things like that, and that's definitely had a huge impact. Moving on to our next bust. These two, I mean, basically we can kind of talk about them together, because Will Levis and the Titans play tonight. The Miami Dolphins play tonight, but they play each other. We're going to begin with Will Levis. Will Levis and the Titans offense in general has been disappointing. It's been a bust. Will Levis, 4 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 1 amazing Mayo commercial. But unfortunately, that doesn't really help you keep your quarterback job if you're throwing some of the worst interceptions and having some of the worst turnovers that we've ever seen. And honestly, I think those kind of things are overrated. Like, the quality of interception doesn't exactly matter. It's still listed as an interception. You know what I mean? Like, throwing the ball underhanded to the guy straight for a touchdown is the same as if you just threw the ball late to a guy on a out route and he picked it off and he jumped it and he ran for a touchdown. You know what I mean? It's the same. It just looks way worse. But even if you strip that away, Will Levis still has not been very good. 76 passer rating. He's been sacked 15 times, which the Titans offensive line, no matter the quarterback the last couple of years, has been bad. But Will Levis doesn't exactly help that because Will Levis is reckless. Will Levis, he's rather going to run straight into a defender and try to knock him straight down. Usually doesn't work. Or he's just going to try to make the craziest throw you've ever seen, the craziest play you've ever seen. He actually, the weird thing about Will Levis, he gives me Jameis Winston vibes. He has great throws down the field and great plays, but he has those other plays that are so bad that they are detrimental to a team winning the game. He's just a quarterback that doesn't know how to win the game. He doesn't know how to just hone himself in and just manage the team. You know, a game manager isn't always a bad thing. Yeah, you can make that incredible throw to Calvin Ridley in double coverage for 60 yards. But then the next play, you make the dumbest throw or you take a stupid sack or you miss the guy by 16 yards. Then you talk about the rest of the offense. The defense has been good. They're actually 5th in yards. I think they have a chance to win tonight against Miami with their 3rd string quarterback or whatever it is. If Will Levis doesn't mess it up, because their defense is really good. They're 5th in yards. Calvin Ridley has been super disappointing as well. He had that one long touchdown against the Jets. But otherwise, 8 catches, 136 yards in 3 games with that touchdown on top. That's not very good. That's not worth the money. That's not what they paid him for. They paid him to be a legit number 1 receiver. Then you talk about the coach, Callahan. You talk about what they try to do with Tyler Boyd and Tony Pollard. And Pollard's been probably the best part of all of this. But man, have they been disappointing from an offensive standpoint. Because if they had a manageable offense, this team would actually be pretty good. Because like I said, the defense is tough. But Levis is a disaster. And they just don't know how to manage that offense to get them to win games. On the other side tonight, we got the Miami Dolphins. If I would have said the Miami Dolphins were 32nd in points, 32nd through 3 games, would you believe me? 32nd in points. This is the Miami Dolphins. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle. That's not good. They're first in fumbles. And then you look at what they did. They barely beat Jacksonville at home. Jacksonville's 0-4. They should have lost. Travis Etienne doesn't fumble. They should have lost the game. You look at Thursday Night Football against Buffalo at home. Super hyped. Miami's going to win. They're favored. They're at home. Their daddy, Josh Allen, is coming to town. They get smoked. Humiliated. And then in week 3 in Seattle, backup quarterback, the guy broken in half, done after 1 game, Skylar Thompson, 24-3. Not even close. So you look at the track record so far, you look at 32nd in points for a team that's supposed to be the best offense in the league. The offensive line can't block. They can't get movement vertical. They can't get push up the field. All their runs are horizontal. Tyreek Hill had the incident off the field that may or may not have been his fault, whatever, but that was also a huge distraction. Jalen Waddle, always hurt, in and out of the lineup. Defense hurt. Dolphins, disappointing. Bust. Who could have seen that coming? It happens every year. Just usually happens later. And lastly, you guys are just going to think I'm the Patriots fan that's hating on the rest of the AFC East. I promise you, the Bills are good. The New York Jets, Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, man, both were first-round picks in fantasy football. If you were playing in a PPR 12-team league, Garrett Wilson was probably going at 11 or 12. Breece Hall was going at 2, 3, 4. Both these guys were first-round picks because they had the great, almighty, bad man, Aaron Rodgers. 0 games of over 60 receiving yards for Garrett Wilson. He's had games of 5 catches, 6 catches, but he has 9.6 yards per catch so far. Under 10. Short passes galore. Aaron Rodgers just trying to protect himself, not trying to get hit. throwing the ball as fast as he possibly can. 0 games over 60 receiving yards. 1 touchdown in 4 games for Garrett Wilson. Not good enough. And then you talk about Breece Hall. Rushing the football, he's been highly disappointing. The most yards he's had in a game is 62 on the ground. 54 and 54 and 2 others. And then 4 yards? 4? Against the Denver Broncos? 4 yards at home? In the rain? When you're supposed to run the ball? 4? So yeah, you can put up your receptions. That's whatever. You can't run the ball, bro. What's going on? So the main guys that are supposed to be the main components, the main heart and soul of the offense of the Jets, have not lived up to expectations. And that's why they're only 2-2 and not 3-1. Right? So disappointing. That'll do it for Monday Morning Reaction presented by Max. I'm Mitch. We'll see ya next week. Hope you enjoyed. Peace.